Okay, so chapter 5 is about short term and working memory. So when we think about memory, we have to remember that it involves any type of process that allows us to retain, retrieve, or use information we take in. Anything we see, smell, touch, taste, hear, feel can all be implanted on our memory. So that can include stimuli, images, events, ideas, and skills. So after something has taken place, it stays with us through our memories. Our memories are active at any time. Some past experiences have an impact on us and how we will behave in the future. So when we think about the model of memory, there are a few different models that come into play, but Atkinson and Sherfrin came up with a model in 1968 that said that there are three parts of our memory system. There's sensory memory, which involves everything we take in, we see, smell, touch, taste, hear. It's the initial stage that everything goes into, but it only stays there for a few split seconds. And then hopefully the information then transfers to our short term memory, which is also going to be very quick. It's a split second, you know, 5 to 7 second holding tank of information as well. And it can hold usually what we say 7 ± 2. So 5 to 9 bits or pieces of information for about 15 to 20 seconds. And then something has to happen. There has to be some type of rehearsal. There has to be some type of repetition, something that happens so the information then encodes from short term memory to long term memory. Long term memory can hold the information for an infinite amount of time, years, decades. Control processes are active processes that can be controlled by a person. So these are the things we can do ourselves. We can rehearse. We can come up with strategies that make information more memorable to us. Like we can decide, I want to use note cards to study something, or I want to come up with some type of mnemonic to so that I remember the information. These different strategies can help us control and process the information, help us focus on it. When it comes to our sensory memory, we're going to retain the information for split seconds, brief periods of time through our senses. The information we take in from our senses will quickly decay or fade away unless something else is done and is transferred to short term memory. Persistence of vision is the retention of our perception of light, and it's how we trail light from like a moving sparkular or in a frame in a film. So again, we take in first information through our senses. If we want to measure the capacity and duration of our sensory memory, we can look at how letters flash on a screen. You can report how many of them you see. There was a study done where participants were asked to report as many as they could see during a research study by Stripling in 1960, and most people averaged about 4.5 out of 12 letters that were flashed on their screen. The partial report method says that participants heard a tone that told them which row of letters to report, and that was about 3.3 out of 4 letters. And then the delayed partial report method found that when a tone was included um, for a fraction of a second after the letters were extinguished, their performance decreased rapidly. Within our sensory memory, we also have iconic and echoic memories. Iconic memories are our memories for things we see and our perception of vision. Our echoic memories are our memories for things we hear and our perception of sound. So if you've ever, gotten somewhere based on directions by, oh, I remember that you turn at that building, that is your iconic memory. Or if you've ever said to yourself, I don't know how I know this, but I heard it somewhere, that is your echoic memory. When it comes to our short term memory stores small amounts of information for a brief period of time. Again, for 15, 20, maybe 30 seconds. This could be information that is new to us and received from our senses, or information that could be recalled from long term memory. The capacity of short term memory is actually very short. That's why it's called short term. For most people, they can remember about 5 to 8 items, or 7 ± 2, when it comes to numbers. And we tend to remember digits better than we can remember letters. And if you think about it, when we look at letters, we want to form words, and we don't have that same connection with digits. Chunking occurs when we take small amounts or units of information and we make it into meaningful parts. Sometimes chunking the information, like 492 into 492, will help us remember it. So Erickson and coworkers in 1980 did a research study where they trained a college student with average memory ability to use the chunking method. That student from that research had an initial digit span of about 7. So before he had any type of training, he could remember a string of digits that were about 7 long. But then after 231-hour training sessions, the student could remember up to 79 digits, because that student was able to chunk them into meaningful units. So this is huge research, especially if it comes to you having to know a bunch of information. If you can chunk it together, that's going to extend your capacity to remember. Then in 2004, Alvarez and Kavanaugh did another research study where they used colored squares as well as complex objects, and they used the change detection method to see if those things could be remembered as well. When it comes to our working memory is a limited capacity system for temporary storage and manipulation of information for tasks that can be complex, like comprehension, learning, and reasoning. It's called our working memory because it's the memory we use to process, to learn, to comprehend, to reason. It's very different from short term memory. So, whereas short term memory is only going to hold information for a brief period of time, your working memory is going to try to store and process and manipulate information. So, it's working memory because it's always active as we're thinking. So, when it comes to our working memory, it's set up to be able to process different types of information at the same time, but it struggles to work properly when similar types of information is presented at the same time. You can see that from the chart there. A phonological loop is the similarity effect, which says that letters or words that sound similar can cause confusion. There are different word length tasks, such as memorizing lists of words. When we do that, it's going to be better for short words than for long words, and it's going to take longer to rehearse long words and produce them during recall. When it comes to a phonological loop and articulatory suppression, speaking prevents one from rehearsing items to be remembered. So that's going to reduce your memory span. It's going to eliminate word lengths and reduce the phonological similarity effect when reading the words. The Visuospatial Sketch Pad is how we can create visual images in the mind whenever there's no physical visual stimulus there. It's how you can mentally rotate something and still imagine how it might look. The central executive is our part of the brain that controls your ability to maintain your attention, focus, and control your suppression of irrelevant information. It's involved in perseveration, which is when you repeat something and you perform it at the same time, or if you just can't sort of take your mind off something, the central executive is controlling that. It's also a backup store that communicates with long-term and working memory components. It holds information longer and has greater capacity for phonological loop and the Visuospatial Sketch Pad. So when we think about the central executive, we can think about it as being sort of an overarching component of long-term memory. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for our ability to engage in executive functioning and processing of visual and auditory information. There have been lots of research studies on the capacity of the prefrontal cortex. Monkeys who have been studied and don't have a prefrontal cortex often have difficulty holding information in their working memory. Neurons in the brain respond when a stimulus is flashed in a particular location and during delay as part of the working memory. And that information remains available for those neurons as long as they fire. So the main thing you want to know about the working memory is that it is always working. It is always thinking. It is always active. Stokes in 2015 said that information that is stored in the short term can change how the brain is made up and change based on neural networks. An activity state is when to be remembered causes neurons to fire, and the synaptic state occurs when the neuron stops firing, but the connections between the neurons are strengthened. And you can see kind of what that looks like from the picture below. So Vogel and coworkers in 2005 did a working memory study about individual capacity. And the results of their study, they had two groups, a high capacity working memory group and a low capacity working memory group. And the results of the study showed that the high capacity participants were more efficient at ignoring distractors, and therefore they were more successful than the low capacity group, because the distractors were there and that was taking away their ability to focus. Hopefully this information will be helpful to you in understanding short-term and working memory.